Let's turn over to a Twitter mailbag. We asked for your questions. Doug and Chris were going to answer them. And the first one comes from Samuel James. Let's assume that the Rams win 8 games and Bradford posts 2012-like stats. Does he get a new deal? And if so, what kind? Chris Burke, what say you?
I think in that case, he does get a new deal, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly where he would land. Certainly, I think he'd be below where we've seen, Kaepernick and Breeze and all those guys, somewhere in that second tier of quarterbacks, if he can establish himself as that type of guy again, and on a team that can contend. Again, I think this is a season where the Rams would love to make the playoffs, obviously, but are just counting on progressing forward and building that young talent up. So if Sam Bradford proves he's part of that nucleus, I don't see why they would get rid of him.
Yeah, I think it's another $13 million in 2015. If he has that kind of season, I would still be on the fence about it. I don't know. This guy, he's been so fragile, and a lot of his early struggles were due to the fact that he had nothing around him. So, maybe Kenny Britt wakes up and develops a brain, and maybe Tavon Austin is used better. Talking to you, Mr. Schottenheimer. Maybe that all comes together. If it were me, I'd want to see how he has that season. What's repeatable? Does he stay healthy? Things like that. I think the Rams would. Were it me, I'd be inclined to punt and move on.
Next, from Eric Edholm. How many other divisions could the 4th place NFC West finisher win?
Let's see. Certainly the NFC East. Certainly the last year's AFC North. We'll see how that goes. Last year's NFC or last year's AFC North, both North divisions. The Rams would say, I don't know, 3 or 4. The Cardinals, talk about a team that wants a secession from their division. They could have won just about everywhere else, except maybe the 2 West divisions with that 10-6 record. Second best defense in the NFL. Just goes back to how tough the whole thing is.
Yeah, I think the Cardinals probably would have won 4 or 5 divisions. The last year's Rams, I don't know that they would have stepped out and won a ton. This year's Rams, I think you could make a case would contend, and I think the AFC North would be there again, the NFC East, and maybe even the AFC South, depending on how the Colts fare.
Chris, this one comes from Tom Logue. Who do you think has the deepest wide receiver core in the division for 2014?
It's so much depends on how these players develop. I think that right now with what Seattle brought in the draft, Harvin, Baldwin, Norwood, Paul Richardson, Jermaine Kearse had some nice games last year. I think it's probably, I guess I'd probably take Seattle just because of the raw talent there compared to the rest of the rosters, although that is ignoring, Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd in Arizona, which is a pretty good 1-2 punch, although the depth's not there. I think I'd take Seattle and hope everyone stays healthy and hope all those young guys develop.
I think Stevie Johnson tipped the scales for me. Vernon Davis actually had better numbers as a deep ball tight end than Jimmy Graham did last year. When Michael Crabtree is healthy, he completely redefines that entire offense. One of my concerns about Kaepernick is that when Crabtree gets hurt, his stats fall off immeasurably. Anquan Boldin was just as tough against opponents for San Francisco as he was for Baltimore and certainly for Arizona years ago. I would say depth right now, I'd go San Francisco. Depth next year, 2 years, 3 years from now, boy, Seattle, you got to like what they do. But I'd say right now, if I could take one receiver tandem and just splat, put them on my team, I'd go with San Francisco.